How's everyone doing? You guys doing good? It's so good to be here. I'm going to do something a little different this morning. I'm going to do a little brainstorming with you. Last week was a little bit of vision for this Sunday, for this year, and so I'm going to continue that for a few minutes, and then we will get to a short lesson. So that's how that's going to go this morning. I'll get to this in just a minute. I just got to bring this up because I know there's a few of you here. Browns fans, get your hands in the air. Both of them. We got any Steelers fans? I have to give it to Browns fans. They waited so long. We'll see how it goes. Oh, yeah. Who's rooting for the Buckeyes Monday night? Who's rooting against the Buckeyes Monday night? We'll probably have a brawl out outside the building after this is all over. Hey, I want to just pray and then we'll start. God, man, there's a lot of junk going on around us, and we come to you and we really believe what we just sang. You're bigger than we ever imagined. And so just be with us in this new year. Grow us in you. Grow us together. Grow this community. Expand this community. God, there are so many people in our town and our valley that don't have true hope. Remind us what we've been given in the assignment you've placed in our hearts. So be with us this morning in the time we have together, and just help us to leave refreshed because of your presence. In Jesus' name, amen. So let me just back up to last week. For those of you who weren't here, I gave you, as part of our talk last week, I put up 3 pictures. It was a picture of the hut of rescue that I think God has really laid it on my heart this year. We need to be really focused on this idea of who's on the shoreline of our lives that needs rescued. And the key thing I want you to remember about that, it takes enormous courage to be a rescuer. I showed you that picture, and I'm not going to explain it. Those of you who weren't here, sorry, I don't have time to go back but those guys that volunteered for that, the recruiting slogan is you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. It takes huge courage to sign up for that kind of assignment, especially in a culture that is safety conscious. I thought about it this morning when Lizanne was singing that last song. I thought about how, man, and in just our world. I'm walking here this morning just like, what's going to happen in the... Those of you who know me, you know I love to read war history, and especially three times: the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and the War of 1812. It was in one of those wars, and I don't know which one. And some of you might have heard about this guy, but it was in one of those wars that one of the generals found himself completely surrounded, and his men came to him and just panicked, like, they're completely around us. We have no way to escape. He looked his men in the eye and says, we got them right where we want them. It takes courage to look at our life and say, we got them right where we want them now. We're right here. The enemy is winning on fronts that I don't want to think you to think of the enemy as a political enemy right now. The enemy of our soul is winning battles and has pushed in on the church in a way that the church needs to say, we got them right where we want them now. The second image was the image of money, the richness you have. Again, back to that song. We're following the one that death bows to. It's how rich we are. We need to live in the richness of all of Jesus has deposited it on our behalf. So the third one was the image of... the boat, rowing together. I have two things in my own life: courage to be who we're supposed to be, and the ability to get all of us with our oars in the water. moving forward this year. Man, it's going to be huge. That's what I want to give you one more image. I don't have a picture. I want to give you one more image that God kind of laid on my heart. And this comes from my own life growing up. I grew up in, not only was my family big, there was 8 of us kids, but our extended family was huge. And so when we had Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner together, and that was about the only time that all of the extended family got together, there was just a lot of people. And so those of you who were raised in big families, you probably know where this is going. We had this thing where all the adults got to sit at the big table, and then there was the kids' table over here. And we were just, and I remember thinking, I wonder at what point I get to graduate to the real table. What was interesting, when I finally graduated there, I figured out I didn't even like it. Because the stuff that happened at the kids' table was not appropriate. Anyhow, I give you that image just for this. I think in church life sometimes there's a big table and a kids' table. Here's what struck me. Everybody on our leadership team here is over 50 now, which means the end of the runway is coming for us. When I say kids' table, I'm not talking about the kids that are in the, I'm talking about, I have an intense passion this year to start including the people that are younger, because we're going to pass this thing off to you. And I want to dream with you before that happens. And so what I'm looking forward to, and I'm not sure when this is going to happen, I've been dreaming about this. We want to do an elder and training program where some of you can come join us and start to brainstorm about the future of the church, about programs, about stuff we can do better. Because here's what's going to happen. I promise you this, when this thing gets handed over to the next generation, God's going to do a new thing, and it's going to be better. They're going to do things better than some of us. We just dream about doing it. They're going to be able to do it. So we want to begin to engage that right away. So sometime in the next month, it's going to take, I'm going to brainstorm with the elders on the leadership team on Tuesday night when we meet about this. What I'm hoping to do is have 2 meetings, one for the younger people. Now, I'm not going to put an age on that, but I'll just say this. If you look in the mirror and you look anything like the white, don't show up at that meeting. You're not supposed to be there. Just kidding. No, this is for younger people. Dwight, I had to pick on you. The other meeting I want to have is for all of us older folks. I tell you, some of you guys have a lifetime of wisdom that's sitting here on a Sunday morning. That is so valuable. We must not waste that. You've lost battles, and in losing those battles, you figured out how to win battles. And you must be available to talk to the younger generation and to coach and all of that. Man, do we need you guys. And when this is all over, and when we step out and the next generation steps in, I hope the biggest fans they ever have are sitting right here. And we're cheering them on, saying, "Get them!" Because that's where we are. But we need your wisdom. We need you to be engaged. We're going to talk about how we can make that happen on a level. So we're going to need to have a meeting with the younger people. What are your dreams? How do you see church? What connects with you that's maybe different from what connected with us? We're going to go there. We're also going to talk with you older folks. Give us a little time. We got to plan this so it's done well. We need every oar in the water, guys. Man, right now we can't have oars sticking in the air and the boat not moving well. We must have every oar in the water. Now, the other thing, and then I'm going to go to a short lesson, is this. I'm offering this. I brainstormed this, and if you were here, and man, it seems like July or August, I put this up, and I'm ready to engage to tackle this. I'm going to do this with a few other people. This is what we're going to call a small group where we tackle 7 areas of life training. Now, let me just tell you how I imagine this. I'm only asking, I know you guys' lives are busy. To go through all of that takes time. I'm only asking for 4-week commitments. Each one of these areas will be dealt with in 4 weeks, just 4 lessons. We're only going to scratch the surface because you can't, when you think about talking about marriage in 4 weeks, you've only given a few ideas. with the idea that you take what you've heard and you begin to get with the people around you, and as you have dinner together and you begin to invite people over, those you're comfortable with, those you journey with, and say, how's it working for you? So we want to learn some principles. We want to become accountable to somebody. And we want to think, how do we grow this stuff? So the first one is your relationship with God. What does that actually look like? Because we have all these kind of ideas, the fall and my redemption, and now I'm in Christ. We're going to take some of that apart. 4 weeks. I only need 4 weeks. And I'm not going to be doing all of the teaching. I'm going to be bouncing off with other guys to do this. But what I'm asking for a 4-week commitment. We'll take a week break. We'll jump in. I feel like we should go 1 and 2 in that order. 2 is if the first one's our relationship with God, the second one deals with our mind, will, and emotions, how that all plays out in our journey. How does this thing, how do we somehow renew our mind? How does all that happen? And why do I struggle if I'm actually new? We're going to deal with that. The rest of those we can take in any order, and it will be in order of how you want it. Because we need to set a foundation. 1 and 2 sets the foundation. Number 3, what we're looking at in 3 is if 1 is your relationship with God, number 3, social, is your relationship with people. You must have friends in your life. What affects friendship? 1, rejection. If you've suffered rejection in your life, I promise you it's harder for you to open up to friends. Second idea, some of the other ideas is how you doing in the forgiveness area. If I harbor all kinds of stuff and I have this junk and baggage, it affects me socially. It affects how much people want to be involved and do life with me. So we're going to deal with, let me see here, and that one, rejection, this forgiveness, the other. There's going to be a couple more, but the one other one is judging. When we become judgmental in how we view people, most people don't want to hang out with someone like that. We're going to deal with that. Marital, 2 become 1. What the heck is that? We're going to look at that. And then what does psychological intimacy look like? And that eventually leads us to how does that affect physical intimacy? And we're going to take that apart. If you're interested in that, it'll just be 4 weeks. Parental. All you need to do is have kids, and you realize that whatever you imagined about them, they'll throw you curves that you never knew you could even swing at, right? Let's sit and talk about it. Financial. How do we invest wisely? How do we spend wisely? What does financial freedom look like? We're going to take that apart. Physical. What we're going to do is, so you see the relationship. So if the first one's my relationship to God, and the third one is my relationship to my friends, the fourth one is my relationship to my spouse, the fifth one, my relationship to my children, and the last one then, it's going to be, I'm just going to call it my relationship to my body. Because when God wired you, He made your body, He made this for some specific reasons, and to be able to enjoy the world He created. Now, here's where we're going to go. Your enemy is going to try to take everything good that God's placed in your heart and twist it so that it becomes not good and becomes destructive. So let me just give you a few of those when we get to that one. God's given you the ability to, or maybe I'll say the desire to be diligent and to work. How does Satan twist it? Makes you a workaholic. God's given you the ability or the desire for sex. What does Satan do with that? He twists it so that you do it in an inappropriate time and place. And now your life is rooted in shame and regret and remorse and guilt. If you're caught in that, we're going to try to help you walk to freedom in that. But you see how this stuff that God gives us, God gives you the desire for food. And then we become foodaholics if we're not. Is that a word? We're going to make it a word in this class. So just God has given us an ability to appreciate beauty, and then it becomes sensual and it becomes twisted and all that. That's where we're going to go. How did God make us, and how can we function in that? So, all that, and then I'm going to get to the lesson because I don't have much time. 4 weeks on each one of these. You can do 1, you can do 2, you can do... So I'm going to send this around. I don't need to know which ones you're going to, because we're going to start with 1 and 2. If you're interested in being in any one of these studies, right now we're just going to try to get a general idea. If we have to do this 2 or 3 times a week to get everybody, I don't know how many people are even interested. We want to make these groups small enough so we can be really honest. So we don't want it some huge group that it's like, oh my gosh, I can't really talk here. So we have to do this multiple times a week. That's our commitment. It's a leadership commitment to you guys. So name, contact information, what night it suits you, and then next Sunday, it's not going to start this week, it's going to start the week after. Sometime in that week, next Sunday we'll announce where and how many times, and we'll get the details hammered out this week. One more thing before we move on to the talk. Last Sunday was just a really cool Sunday for me because I got to dream, and whenever I get to dream, I had so many years of so much pain in my heart I couldn't dream, and I'd stand up here Sunday after Sunday with 0 dreams for you. I was just trying to be healed of the hurt and pain in my own heart. And when you're going through that, it's really hard to dream for the people around you. Last Sunday was so much fun. But here's what I want to say. At the end of the service, we brought that thing down. And for those of you who maybe don't know what that is, we don't have formal membership, but you get to put your color in the sand. And the whole idea is that you look up there and say, I'm part of that picture. I get to be part of it. And we brought it down here, and after communion, after the service, I went out. I come back in, and Jerry said, there was quite a few of you come up and dump sand in here. From my heart to yours, I'm forever grateful that you're willing to put your oar in the water with us. We are going to do the best we can to make sure this boat moves well in 2021. Amen. So pray for the leadership, and pray for, I think 2 things are really crucial. I think our worship to God in this year is going to be so crucial, and I think our prayers to God are going to be so important. So pray and let's worship together, and I think we're going to just have a super, super cool year, even though I know it's going to be hard. It's not going to derail the boat from moving ahead. Every oar in the water is our motto this year. All right, let's go to our lesson. I'll do this quickly because I've taken up time. We're in Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. Now, I'm going to just tell you this before I read this. If there isn't something about this parable or this story that disturbs you, you probably missed the story. You might want to go back, because this is one of those stories. What is that? Let's read it. For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal day wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to the work in the vineyard. At noon and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw some more people standing around. He asked them, "Why haven't you been working today?" They replied, "Because no one hired us." The landowner told them, "Then go out and join the others in my vineyard." That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed, bad thing. they assumed they would receive more, but they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner. Those people worked only 1 hour, and yet you've paid them just as much as you paid us, who worked all day in the scorching heat. He answered one of them, "Friend, I haven't been fair. Didn't you agree to work all day for our usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then." So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last. That obviously happened before there was unions. See, that doesn't happen in our world, does it? I mean, there's a problem there. What do you think of that story? And what are we to do? Because the story starts this way. The kingdom of heaven is like. So when Jesus is telling this story, he's not just telling some bizarre story that they at night around the fire, they're scratching their heads saying, "I don't know what that was, but I sure don't know what to do with it. And what was that?" He's saying, guys, I want to tell you something about the kingdom of heaven. So take the story through that lens. Now, I want to tell you just a couple of things, and I'll try to make this quick. I need to make this quick. The purpose, the reason, let's look at why he was telling this story. One of it is it's sandwiched between this language, and I'm going to avoid this language today just because I still have a lot of thinking to do. When he talks about first, last, if you remember in chapter 19, he was saying that same thing. There's people who think they're the big dogs, and when they finally find out that they're not, they're going to be surprised who's actually more important in the kingdom than they are. So there's this reversal goes on. That's one reason he's telling the story. Maybe more to the point, though, why he's telling the story is what happened in chapter 19. And I know we've taken a long break from that, so let's just remind you, in chapter 19, there's this young kid comes up to him, this young guy that's been crazy successful, and he says, what do I have to do to be part of your kingdom? And Jesus starts to talk to him. And when it's all done, and you remember, those of you who remember, he said, "What do I have to do?" And Jesus said, "Well, you got to obey that." And he said, "I've done all that." And Jesus said, "I tell you what you need to do. You need to go sell your stuff and start giving some money to the poor." And Jesus loved this guy. And Jesus sat there while the disciples are watching and watched this guy turn around and walk away. And then Peter jumped in. And Peter said, "Don't you love Peter?" He verbalized what everybody else was thinking, and so he became the bad guy in some sense. But he said, "Hey, just to let you know, Jesus, we left everything for you. What are we going to get?" Maybe that's what brought this story up. Is it really about what you get? I think there's maybe another, so it's in response to Peter's claim, we left everything, and his question, what's in it for us? The other reason is Jesus really wants to show the generosity of the landowner. This is stunning and this is staggering. When I'm done this morning, I'm going to tell you a story that really brought this text to the forefront of my life a lot of years ago, and we'll end with that. But I think the last reason he told this story is a caution to lifers. See, lifers can get trapped. And if you don't know what I mean by lifer, those of us who have been in church and have followed Jesus and been kind of around this stuff all our lives, it's a caution to us. Be careful. Now, let's take apart the story real quick. So there's a lot of things that are very normal about what goes on. The working hours. It says he went out early in the morning. The Jewish working hour was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And And in this particular case, they're being sent out to a vineyard. It's harvest time. It's important they get their harvest in. And I was reading up on this, and historians, Old Testament or New Testament historians will just tell you that when they started harvesting, it was also right at the time when storms would move in. So when the grapes were ripe, you needed to get them off, and you needed to get them off quickly because you had a I should say a small window to get this work done. So when the grapes were ripe, this scene happened every year in the land of Israel. They would go out and hire guys. I gotta have you, we must get the crop in. We must get it in quickly. So there's no surprise there. The wage was generous. If you actually check it out, for an unskilled worker, it actually was, these guys are doing okay. People standing around waiting for a job, that part of the story, that scene of the story. I want to give a perspective on these people. They were unemployed. They were not beggars. In the land of Israel, you were only a beggar if you were physically unable to go work. So these guys weren't the guys that you see in Pueblo standing on the side of the road trying to get you to throw something in a can. These guys were desperate for work. They wanted work. There was nothing available. So they would gather in this certain place, this marketplace area, just waiting for somebody to come up and say, man, I need help today. Can you go with me? Because there was a lot of things going on in the financial structure of their lives, that there was a lot of people out of work. So these guys are not lazy. These guys are not bums. These guys are hard workers that didn't have a job, So the last scene then, that takes us to the last scene. They were paid at the end of the day. That was very common. Here's why. You need to know this. It makes the stories different. They would take that money and go home and buy food for that night and for the next day for their family. These guys are desperate. That's where the landowner meets them. He comes and says, 6 a.m, he says, I got work for you guys. I'll pay you a day's wage, a generous day's wage, if you come out and work for me. These guys are all jazzed. We're going to have dinner tonight. And they go. 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. Why does he pay them all the same? Was he actually not fair? I mean, as you process this, how do you process that? And what are we supposed to do with that? Let me just give you a couple of ideas, and then I'll tell my story, and we'll be out of here. Was he fair? Let's deal with that. Well, what did he promise the guys? Did they get what they were promised? So he was fair. So they weren't complaining about whether he was fair. They were complaining because he was generous. Now let me switch the scene. Well, let me just say this. There's two groups of people in this story. There's one group that's under contract, and there's a whole other group that are working with a promise. And the only promise is, I'll be fair with you. Now, here's my question to you. In just your life, would you work for somebody that you had no idea what you're going to get paid? They just simply said, I'll be fair with you. You going to go out and work? I'm convinced there's two kinds of Christians. There's contract Christians and there's promise Christians. And contract Christians, at the end of the day, feel somehow cheated by what they're getting from God. Like he's too generous to those. I mean, isn't there someone in your life that you've watched be successful and watch be under the blessing of God? And it's like, I've watched, that guy's a solid punk. How does he fit into this picture and why? And if God's giving him that, he better have a bonus somewhere in this for me, because I've been at it for years and years, right? You ever feel that? You ever feel cheated, like somebody else is getting the better slice of the pie than you are? It was interesting at the funeral on, that was Thursday, correct? Thursday. I got to meet some friends of mine from a lifetime ago, it feels like. And a couple of us guys were in school together in Pennsylvania. It wasn't Chambers, but I can't think of the town. But somewhere in Pennsylvania, we were in school together, and we got talking about a group of us guys that had hung together, became especially close friends, and got talking about what's happened to some of the other guys, Sam and Joel, and we're swapping stories. And finally the guy looked at me, because it's real interesting, some of the really hard stuff some of us had to go through. And he looked at me and said, you know, it would have been really interesting when we were in our 20s, if we could have wrote the story of our lives as we imagined it would happen, and compare it to where we are now. Do I stand here this morning and feel like I deserve more from the landowner? The question is, do you follow Jesus under contract or under promise? Because people that follow him under a promise are the people who realize they don't deserve any of this. And at the end of the day, they live in this continual overwhelming, just flowing from their lives, this overwhelming praise and thanksgiving. I don't deserve any of it, and I am so lucky and so blessed. He came to the marketplace when I had no way, when I was stripped to nothing, and said, I need you. Would you come work for me? People under contract forget that. And they become the people, you've seen them. They're those Christians that walk around, they're kind of slumped down, and they're just, I'm suffering for Jesus. You better ask him, because you may not be suffering for him. He may not know anything about it. And I thought about it. As I watched the events of last year unfold, and the story of my life, which had freakishly hard moments, do I stand here this morning with wild-eyed excitement that I get to go to the vineyard today? Or do I stand here, I deserve better than that? Why did that happen to me? Are you a contract Christian or are you a promise Christian? Now the story. I was 21. Through the years when I was 21 and 22, I worked as a chaplain's assistant in a couple of prisons in southern Alabama. So a lot of you have heard me talk about this, but some of the new people haven't. So what that simply meant is we, 6.5 days a week, we got a half day off, but 6.5 days a week, we were in the prison with the guys. And that was just our schedule. And it was crazy, because I don't even know why I signed up for this or how it intrigued me, because I was this kid that was raised in a Christian home, went to a Christian school. Everything about my life was sheltered and protected, and I walk into a maximum security prison and get shoved up on death row with these guys staring at me. Like, I'm going to tell them something? Boy, you talk about getting shoved right out of every part of your comfort zone. I mean, you don't get on death row by these guys' rap sheets, and I had access. I don't know why they let us chaplains have access to rap sheets. I quit. It was so disturbing. You'd walk in there and look at that through those bars, and it's like, holy cow, you are a wicked person. There's one guy that was particularly hard. His name was Wayne. He was part of a crime. I won't get into. And the interesting part, let me just back up and say, the interesting part of working death row is in that particular prison, the death row section of the prison was like here, and right over here was the death cell, what they called the death cell, and right next to the death cell was what they called the big yellow mama. That was just termed, that's where the electric chair was. That's where they executed people. Every guy on death row had a date with that chair. Every single guy. And so when you walked in there, you knew when their date was. Now, some of them would get extended. You know how the system works. But in the 80s in Alabama, not so much. And Wayne's date was coming up. Wayne was so freaking hard. He was scary. When you stood in front of his cell, it's not an exaggeration, you never got close. He always had a razor blade with him. And it was numerous times those guys got too close and he'd grab them, pull them in, and try to slice them. So you always stood back a little bit. And there was always this thing. Well, the day came, and the chaplain of the prison, his name was Joe. Joe called a couple of guys, a group of guys from Ohio and a group of guys from Pennsylvania, and told them this: Wayne has 12 hours to live. Would you guys get together and just intercede that God would do a miraculous work in his life? Because he's going to die at 12:01. He's gone. At somewhere around 10 o'clock, Joe went down to the death chamber. They'd move them 24 hours before the execution. They'd move them from their cell on death row. They'd move them to this cell, and they were watched continually. Joe walked into his cell, and he said, Wayne, you're not going to get a stay of execution. Can I talk to you about Jesus one last time? And for the next, he pleaded with Wayne. And somewhere around 11 o'clock, before they start moving Wayne from here to the chair and start that whole process, Wayne broke and began to just sob and cry out to Jesus. They went through the execution at 12:01, and Joe left the prison. And there was a group of guys that he wanted to talk to. I'll never forget this. Joe, when he talked about Wayne, he walked into the room. He had tears streaming down his face. And he said this: I want to tell you guys how absolutely amazing my Jesus is. Wayne gets the same reward as I do.
Amen.
Aren't you so grateful that you're following a generous Jesus? That to the undeserving, to those who get in right in the last moment, to those who maybe don't even play the game that well, to everyone, he's generous with his grace. My question to you this morning is, are you here this morning with just wild-eyed excitement that you get to follow him? and you get to work in his vineyard today, tomorrow, the next day, the next day, the next day? Or are you under contract? Christians that are under contract are just tough to be around because they just go through the same motions over and over again. And there's no excitement, there's no passion, there's no like, man, I am so lucky. I get to work for him. Promise Christians live differently. They're like, I don't even care about the reward. I didn't sign up for this because of that. I know one thing, he came to the marketplace when I had no reason, nothing to turn to, and invited me to be part of his program. And I'm forever, forever grateful for that. Which one describes you? As the worship team come, I just hope you think about it. The prayer team's going to be at the back. If you've been in a flat place in your life and you want to just pray with somebody to say, man, I've just lost the excitement of being asked to be in his vineyard, go back, and if you want to go back and pray with them or pray with somebody around you. But they're going to be in the back if you need prayer. But I hope this week you live in the excitement and the freshness and the joy of being a promise keeper or a promise Christian who realizes that he wouldn't have had to choose me at the marketplace, but he did. And I'm going to celebrate that in my life.